A heated argument at a Tampa gym takes an unexpected turn when a bystander steps in, but what happens next shocks everyone, especially when that bystander turns out to be Mark Zuckerberg. It was a busy evening at Iron Haven Fitness in Tampa, Florida. The gym buzzed with energy as people pushed through their workouts, headphones plugged in, sweat dripping, and focus razor sharp. The clanging of weights and the rhythmic thud of feet on treadmills filled the space, a familiar soundtrack for the regulars. Over by the squat rack, a woman named Tasha adjusted the barbell on her shoulders, exhaling as she prepared for another set. At 38, Tasha was no stranger to hard work. She came here after long days at the hospital, where she worked as a nurse. Tonight, she was just looking to unwind. Nearby, a man, probably mid-40s, broad-shouldered and exuding impatience, stood tapping his foot. His name was Ethan, and he had been eyeing the rack for over 10 minutes. Tasha hadn't noticed. She was focused, moving through her routine with precision. Ethan, however, had reached his limit. He walked over and cleared his throat. "Hey, you gonna be much longer?" "Some of us are waiting," he snapped, his voice sharper than necessary. Tasha glanced at him, startled but calm. "Just a couple more sets," she said politely. "I won't be long." But that wasn't enough for Ethan. "A couple more? You've been hogging this thing forever," he shot back, his tone growing louder. Heads began to turn, a few gym-goers subtly pulled out their earbuds, sensing trouble brewing. Tasha straightened up, meeting his glare. "Look, I'm almost done. Just give me 5 minutes." Ethan wasn't having it. He stepped closer, his voice now carrying across the gym. 5 minutes? That's what you said 10 minutes ago. People like you think you own this place." Her jaw tightened, but she kept her cool. "I don't think I own anything. I'm following gym etiquette. Maybe you should try the same." The tension was palpable. A few people shuffled uncomfortably, while others lingered to see where this was headed. Yet amidst the crowd, no one intervened. Except for one man. He was seated in the far corner of the gym, dressed in a plain black t-shirt and sweatpants. He looked almost unrecognizable without his usual entourage or fanfare, but it was unmistakably Mark Zuckerberg. He'd been quietly working out, blending in as much as someone of his stature could. Mark watched the exchange unfold, his expression unreadable, but his eyes betrayed a flicker of interest. Tasha resumed her squats, clearly trying to defuse the situation. But Ethan wasn't done. His frustration bubbled over into something uglier. "You know, it's people like you who ruin this for everyone. Maybe stick to the cardio machines if you can't handle real weights." A collective gasp rippled through the gym. The comment was low, intentionally disrespectful. Tasha froze mid-motion, her knuckles white as she gripped the barbell. But before the tension could snap completely, something shifted in the room. All eyes turned toward the corner where Mark had stood up. Ethan's words hung in the air, heavy and sharp. Tasha set the barbell back onto the rack with a metallic clang, her breathing steady but her eyes blazing with anger. She turned to face Ethan, who was now leaning forward slightly, his stance almost challenging. "I come here to work out, not to be disrespected," Tasha said firmly, her voice calm but resolute. She held her ground, refusing to be intimidated. Ethan scoffed, crossing his arms. "Disrespected? You're the one wasting everyone's time." The gym had gone eerily quiet. Conversations had stopped, weights were left mid-lift, and even the hum of treadmills seemed muted. People stood frozen, their curiosity outweighing their discomfort. A few exchanged uneasy glances, but no one stepped forward. The bystander effect had fully taken hold. At the edge of the free weight section, a young employee in a blue gym shirt fidgeted nervously. He glanced between the confrontation and the front desk, seemingly debating whether to intervene. But like the others, he hesitated, unsure of how, or if, he should step in. Ethan, emboldened by the lack of opposition, took a step closer to Tasha. His voice rose, each word dripping with condescension. "Maybe if you spent less time pretending you're a bodybuilder and more time being considerate, we wouldn't have this problem." Tasha's face hardened, her hands clenching into fists at her sides. She wasn't one to back down, but she wasn't about to let this escalate further. Still, the humiliation stung, and Ethan's growing aggression was starting to feel more threatening than annoying. "Back off," she said firmly, her voice loud enough for everyone to hear. I'm not here for this. But Ethan didn't back off. Instead, he smirked, as if her resistance was a challenge he was eager to meet. His body language became more assertive, his movements sharper, his tone more cutting. Or what? What are you going to do about it? That's when Mark Zuckerberg made his move. He had been watching quietly, his expression calm but focused. The moment Ethan's smirk appeared, Mark stood from the bench he'd been sitting on and started walking toward the confrontation. His steps were measured, his presence commanding. It wasn't until he was halfway across the room that people started to recognize him. Murmurs rippled through the crowd, their eyes widening in disbelief. Is that Mark Zuckerberg? Someone whispered. What's he doing here? Another muttered. But Mark didn't acknowledge the whispers or the stares. He walked straight up to the two of them, positioning himself between Ethan and Tasha. Despite his casual gym attire, he exuded an unmistakable authority, a stark contrast to Ethan's simmering hostility. Hey, Mark said, his tone even but firm. This stops now. Ethan blinked, caught off guard by the sudden interruption. Who the hell are you two? And then it hit him. His eyes widened as he recognized the man standing in front of him. He faltered, his bravado momentarily slipping. Wait, are you? Yes, Mark said flatly, cutting him off. And I don't think this conversation is going to end well for you if it continues. The gym was dead silent now. All eyes were on the trio, the air thick with anticipation. Tasha, still standing her ground, looked at Mark with a mix of surprise and gratitude. Ethan, on the other hand, seemed to be struggling to process what was happening. His confidence wavered, but he quickly tried to recover. This has nothing to do with you, Ethan snapped, though his voice lacked the same venom it had moments ago. It does now, Mark replied calmly. He turned to Tasha, his expression softening slightly. Are you okay? She nodded, though the tension in her shoulders hadn't entirely eased. I'm fine, thanks. Mark turned back to Ethan, his gaze steady and unflinching. Listen, I don't know what's going on with you, but you're way out of line. If you think bullying someone in public is acceptable, you're wrong. And if you think no one's going to call you out on it, you're even more wrong. But as Ethan opened his mouth to respond, Mark raised a hand, stopping him cold. The room held its breath, waiting to see what would happen next. The tension in the gym reached a boiling point as Mark's words hung in the air. Ethan's bravado faltered further, his jaw clenching as he struggled to maintain his footing in a situation that was rapidly spiraling out of his control. The recognition of who stood before him seemed to weigh heavily on his shoulders, but he wasn't ready to back down just yet. This isn't your business, Ethan muttered, though his tone had lost its earlier bite. His eyes darted to the growing crowd, then back to Mark. You don't even know what happened. I don't need to, Mark replied, his voice calm but firm. I've seen enough. This isn't about gym equipment, it's about respect, and you crossed the line. Ethan opened his mouth to argue, but Mark took a step closer, his presence commanding without being overtly aggressive. Let me ask you something, Mark said, his tone conversational but cutting. What were you hoping to accomplish here? To make yourself feel bigger by tearing someone else down? Is that really the kind of person you want to be? The question hit Ethan like a punch to the gut. For a moment he was silent, his expression shifting between defiance and discomfort. The crowd watched in stunned silence, the weight of Mark's words sinking in for everyone present. Tasha, who had remained quiet since Mark stepped in, finally spoke. I don't know what your problem is, she said, her voice steady but laced with emotion. But I'm not here for your ego trip. I came here to work, just like everyone else. Ethan glanced at her, then back at Mark, his shoulders slumped slightly, the fight draining out of him. He muttered something under his breath, but it was too quiet for anyone to hear. What was that? Mark asked, his tone sharp enough to cut through the tension. If you have something to say, say it. I said I'm sorry, Ethan mumbled, his eyes fixed on the floor. Mark nodded, his expression softening slightly. Good. Now maybe it's time to reflect on why it took all this for you to realize you were in the wrong. Ethan gave a slight nod, his face flushed with embarrassment. Without another word, he turned and walked away, disappearing into the locker room. The gym remained silent for a beat, the weight of the moment still heavy in the air. Then, as if on cue, a smattering of applause broke out among the onlookers. It started with a few tentative claps but quickly grew into a wave of appreciation. Mark turned to Tasha, who looked both relieved and a little overwhelmed. "You didn't have to do that," she said, her voice soft but sincere. "Yes, I did," Mark replied. "Sometimes the only way to stop someone from crossing a line is to draw it for them." Tasha nodded, a small smile breaking through her earlier frustration. "Thank you." Mark gave her a reassuring nod, then glanced around at the crowd, which was beginning to disperse. "All right, everyone," he said, his tone lightening. "Show's over, let's get back to work." But as the gym-goers returned to their routines, the echoes of what had just happened lingered, leaving everyone with something to think about. As the gym gradually returned to its usual rhythm, the energy in the room felt different. Conversations had shifted, people whispered about what had just unfolded, their voices tinged with awe and admiration. For Tasha, however, it was less about the spectacle and more about what it represented. She took a moment to steady herself, still processing the unexpected turn her evening had taken. Mark, now back at his corner bench, wiped his hands with a towel and grabbed his water bottle. His demeanor was as unassuming as ever, as though he hadn't just stepped into the middle of a heated altercation and completely diffused it. But as he prepared to continue his workout, Tasha walked over. "I just wanted to say thanks again," she said, her voice warm but still carrying the weight of what had happened. "Not a lot of people would have done what you did." Mark looked up and gave her a small smile. "You didn't need me to step in, you were holding your own. I just wanted to make sure it didn't go further." Tasha chuckled softly, shaking her head. "Still, I appreciate it. It's not every day someone like you steps in to stand up for someone like me." Mark raised an eyebrow. "Someone like you? You know," Tasha said with a faint shrug, "someone who's just ordinary." Mark set his bottle down and leaned forward slightly, his expression thoughtful. "There's nothing ordinary about standing your ground when someone's trying to knock you down. That's strength. Not muscles, not money, not power. Just that." The word struck a chord, and Tasha nodded, a quiet smile forming on her lips. For a moment, the conversation felt deeply personal, as if the rest of the gym had faded away. Meanwhile, Ethan remained in the locker room, sitting on a bench with his head in his hands. The reality of his actions was sinking in, and for the first time, he allowed himself to feel the weight of his behavior. He wasn't a bad person, at least that's what he told himself. But tonight, he had let frustration and ego get the better of him, and it took a stranger's intervention to make him realize it. When Ethan finally emerged, the gym was winding down for the night. He avoided eye contact with anyone, heading straight for the door. But before he left, he paused and looked back at Tasha, who was mid-conversation with Mark. For a fleeting moment, he considered walking over to apologize again. To really apologize. But the words caught in his throat. Instead, he walked out, the cool night air hitting him like a slap to the face. Back inside, Mark glanced at the clock and grabbed his things, preparing to leave. As he headed for the exit, Tasha called out, "Take care, Mark. And thanks." He gave her a small wave. "You too. And keep doing what you're doing." As he stepped out into the parking lot, the weight of the evening began to settle over him. He hadn't planned to get involved in anything tonight, just a simple workout to clear his head. But sometimes, moments like these find you, not the other way around. But as he walked to his car, he couldn't shake the thought. What if no one had stepped in? What if no one stood up for Tasha? Mark's steps slowed as the answer settled in. Sometimes, courage isn't about who you are, but who you choose to be in the moment. And tonight, Mark chose to be something more. Something better.